Who is Lakshya Sen facing in the Olympic semi-final? When I ask a real-time prompt to a large language model, this is what I get. Unfortunately, I don't have access to real-time information, including live sports and schedule. But what if I need my model to give response to the real-time questions? This is where we have function calling. Let's see how function calling generates the response. In order to use function calling in Gemini, you just have to use enable automatic function calling to be true. Once this is done, you can pass in any prompt which has the real-time information. Based on that, now if you see the response, you have the actual response who Lakshya Sen will be facing in the Olympic semi-final. This is what function calling is capable of doing, combining your real-time information with a large language model. How do you actually implement this? Watch this video till the end to understand in depth what is function calling. Hey everyone, welcome back to this new video where we will implement function calling using Gemini. This is one of my favorite topic in generative AI space because a large language model interacting with real-time information is one of the coolest methodology out there. Before we can jump into function calling, let's understand it in a block diagram way. What is the flow and how you can implement it. So we'll start off with model inferencing. So what is model inference? So this is a very simple process. We have a prompt, you have a user prompt, and you just have to feed this user prompt to a large language model. So let's take you have Gemini 1.5 Flash. So we have Gemini 1.5 Flash. This is the model name. You feed in this user prompt to the model name or the model large language model, and then this will generate a content. So this generated content is nothing but your response. This is very simple workflow. The workflow consists of only three things. You have a user prompt, you give it to a large language model that is Gemini 1.5 Flash, and it generates a content for you. If you look at in this entire workflow, whenever I ask a real-time information, it is not able to get the response back. Why? Because each large language model has a knowledge cutoff. So what is knowledge cutoff? It is only trained till 2023 April or 2023 September. So this is where the model is restricted to only have the information on which it was trained on. If you ask something related to ongoing Olympics, a large language model doesn't understand what is going on, who is competing with whom. So this is where you need to have a functionality where you can interact with the real-time information, get the source, and then feed it to a large language model. And this is where we have function calling. So let's understand the flow of function calling. So let me drag this down. Now we will start with function calling. Just a second, function calling. So what does a function calling does? We'll take the same thing. We'll take the same user prompt. So this user prompt is now a real-time information. I want to know what is going on in Olympics 2024. And once I ask this prompt, you don't pass it to a large language model directly. Instead, you will give it to a function. So this function contains of two things. So you have a function. It contains an API parameters. It contains API parameters. So what is API parameters? In simple words, let's imagine you need to get information from Wikipedia, right? If you want to get all the resources from Wikipedia, you have to give certain parameter, which is the user query. In our example, the user query itself is an API parameter. And once you have this API parameter, you have an external API. So external API, it can be Google search, it can be Wikipedia, it can be DuckDuckGo, it can be literally anything that you want to give it in a single function. So here I'll just write external API. So once the user prompt is passed, it will add in your API parameter format. Once you properly format it, you are giving it to a external API. So this external API, it can be anything within your function. So once this is done, this API will generate a source. So this API will generate a source, which is your response. I'll just write it as source. And once you have this source, you will pass it to a large language model. So now you have a large language model, which is your Gemini 1.5 Flash. Gemini 1.5 Flash. Once you have the source, you're not just passing the source, you're also passing the user prompt. So let's take the same user prompt and give it to Gemini. And once it is passed to the Gemini model, you just have to generate the content. Let me drag this. Okay, just a second. Okay, so now once you have the content, you're passing it to the Gemini model and you're getting the response. So this is how a function calling actually works. You have the user prompt, which has the real-time information. You need to format it in your API parameters, pass it to the external API where you can do Google search, DuckDuckGo, anything, and then it will generate a source, which is your response from the API. You pass the source along with your user prompt to the large language model, that is Gemini. And once you have the prompt inside your Gemini model, it will generate the response. This particular response is also called as tool, right? When you're defining your model in Gemini, you pass the user prompt along with tool. So this tool is nothing but your function name. You just have to keep this in mind. You have a model, you need to combine prompt and tool, and you have to pass it to the large language model. This is the simple task. How do you implement this? Let's get back to the code implementation. It's time for code implementation. Let's rename the notebook. I'll just keep it as Gemini function calling. All right. Since we are using Collab Notebook, we don't have to install Google.generative AI library. Why? Because it's already pre-installed. So I'll directly import it. Import Google.generative AI as Gen AI. So this is the simple import statement. We don't have to install any libraries in this code implementation. We will directly use one single library. The next step is we need to set up our API key, set up our API key. And there are two ways you can do it. Either you can directly use a variable and you can configure it inside generative AI. The second method is you can use an environment variable. I will show you both the method. You can choose whichever method suits best to you. So the first method is I'll save it inside environment variable using import OS from getPass import getPass. The reason why I am using getPass is when I copy my API key, it's not visible to anyone. You can ignore this step. You can directly use import OS and you can paste your API key. But in my case, I'll be using getPass. Now what I'll do is I'll define a variable called key and I'll just use getPass. Enter your Gemini API key. And then I will save it inside an environment variable, which is API key equals to key. So this is the first method. The second method is, since we have already imported Google.generative AI, I will directly use genai.configure. And inside this, you can define API key equals to key. And how do you actually get your API key? You can go to ai.studio.google.com and sorry, it's ai.studio.google.com. And once you enter this platform, you will see Google AI Studio. You have to click on Get API Key. Once you click on Get API Key, you can generate your new key. So I've just copied my key. I'll come back to the Collab notebook. I will run this cell and I will copy the key. All right, so I've copied my key now. The next step is we will work on model inference. So what is model inference? You define a prompt, you pass it to a large language model, and you get the response. Very simple. So what I'll do, I'll define a prompt. The prompt, I'll keep it real time so that I can show you the difference between function calling and normal model inference. So I'll just ask something related to Olympics 2024, which is real time and which is currently happening. So I'll just ask, who is Lakshay Sen facing in the Olympic semi-final? So this is the real-time question that I want to ask to the large language model. And the model name that we will use is Gemini 1.5 Flash. So this is the model name, and we will define LLM. LLM equals to Gen AI dot, it should be generative AI model, and I'll just define model name equals to model name. Got it. Now, the last step is you need to generate the response. Response equals to LLM dot generate content. So this is the function generate content. I'll just pass my prompt. So this is gonna take 3 to 4 seconds to generate the response. And once you have the response, you just have to print response dot txt, which is text. Now, once you print the response, as you can see, unfortunately, I do not have access to real-time information, including live sports schedule. The large language model doesn't understand the real-time question. Why? Because it has a knowledge cutoff till April 2023 or September 2023. I'm not quite sure, but there is a knowledge cutoff. This is where we have function calling. We have function calling. So what do we do in function calling? We have to define the API parameters. In our case, the API parameter is a query. I just take a simple query. I need the response. And for external API, I will be using DuckDuckGo, which is a search function. So this is my search function. Then this response, whatever you have, I will pass it as a tool. So this is the tool, and you just have to combine prompt and tool and pass it to a model and then get the response. So this is the flow that we are supposed to carry out now. And since we will be using DuckDuckGo, you need to import DuckDuckGo. So the installation is pip install DuckDuckGo search. So let's use the DuckDuckGo search. I'll import from DuckDuckGo search import ddgs, and what I'll do is I will define the instance of it. So I'll just define search tool equals to ddgs, and then I'll just trigger a request to it. So response equals to, or else I'll just name it as request. Response equals to request dot txt. You need to pass a query. So what is this query? Query, it's nothing but whatever keyword search that you do, right? You go to Google, you write certain prompt or query. In our case, the query is who is Lakshay Sen facing in the Olympic semi-final? I need to know this response. So actually it is Olympics. I forgot about this. Let me rerun. And then you need to decide what should be the number of results that you need to generate. So the max results, in our case, I'll keep it 4. So once you have this, it will generate a list. List will contain 4 elements. So let's understand what is this particular list about. So we will print the type of response. As I already said, the type of response is a list. And if I print the first element of the list, it should be dictionary. So now we have dictionary. Let's see what are the elements inside this. Response 0 dot keys. We have title, we have the URL, and then we have a body. In our case, we will be extracting the body part. So how does the body looks like? So I'll print both response 0 dot title. Okay, let me try this way. Okay, as you can see, you have the title of it and you have the opponent name. So this is what a large language model need. Whenever you trigger a search API, you need to have that keyword in your context, and we have that context. You can either use title or you can use body. Body will have more context. That's where we will be using body when you're running a function call. Now that you know how a DuckDuckGo search tool works, let's define a search function, def search, and I'll give a query. One thing you need to notice here, this is very, very, very important. Whenever you define a query, you need to define the data type. So the data type is string. If you don't define the data type for function calling, you will get an error. This is a very important thing to note. I will not use this for time being. I want you to see the error. And once we get the error, we will come back to our function and we will add the data type. So I'll just in case, I'll write a function sorry, I'll write a comment. So it needs to be def search query, which is str. So this is very important. Once we get the error, we'll come back to this code. So now what you need to do is you just have to copy the code from here. Request ddgs, then request.text where you are adding the prompt. And then you need to get the body of each and single result that you have. You have total 4 results and I need the body of all the 4 results. So here what we are doing is we are defining the Google search, which is your DuckDuckGo. Sorry, not Google, DuckDuckGo. And then you have response where you are passing the query along with the number of results that you need. Here what we will do is we will run a loop. For result in response, I need to create a context variable. So this context variable will have the data from all the 4 results. Context plus equals to result, you add the body. And then instead of returning the response, I will return the context, which is a string. So it's also very important to define a document, which you have to define what is your arguments and what is the return result. So the doc string is very important. So the result, return result, it's nothing but the context. Context, what you can do is context is a string and you can tell search results to the user query. So this is the doc string. And for argument, we just have query, which is user prompt. So this is the doc string and this is how you define a function. We have missed one thing, which is the data type. We will come back to the code and we will define the data type. For time being, let's run this function. You need to define your function inside a tool. So what we'll do is we will define tool. Inside tool, you just have to add a list and just define search. That's it. Now what you need to do is you need to combine your prompt and the tool. So let's come back to the code. Model equals to gen AI dot generative AI model. Model name equals to model name. Here you need to define something called as tools. Tools equals to tool. That's it. So we have defined the function calling. There is one very important step that you need to do now, and that is you need to enable the function calling to be automatic. And in order to do that, we have to define something called as start chat. So I'll just write chat equals to model dot start chat, and here you have to make enable automatic function calling to be true. So whenever there is a query which needs real-time information, it will look at enable automatic function calling. Since it is true, it will directly generate the response. So let's run this. And now we just have to run our response. So this is the entire flow. Get your API format, which is your query. You need to define data type. And then you need to have an external API. Our external API, it's nothing but a DuckDuckGo search. This DuckDuckGo search will give us a source from the body, and this body will be passed inside the tool, and you have to enable automatic function calling to be true. Once this is done, you can start messaging. Send message. So this message is a prompt. So as you can see, we got an error, and I already told you why we got the error. The reason is you need to define your API format with a data type. So I'll just write str And I will rerun this again. I already told you that we will get an error. So now most probably it should not give you any error. Why? Because we have already defined a data type. As you can see, it only took 4 seconds and we have our response ready. So in order to get the response, you just have to do response.txt. There you go. We have the response. As you can see, we got the response who Lakshay will be facing in Olympic semi-final. This is the real-time interaction that a large language model is doing it on external API. If you look at the previous response, LLM didn't had any clue who Lakshay is facing in the semi-final of Olympics. It just said, I don't have access to real-time information. Now, if you look at the response, since we have enabled automatic function calling to be true, you got the response, which is interacting with DuckDuckGo. And this is what function calling is capable of. And in our YouTube channel, I've already shared a lot of videos on retrieval augmented generation. There is also a concept on how you can combine function calling with RAG. This is what we will be doing in the upcoming videos. That's it for this video. And if you liked the implementation of function calling with Gemini, do subscribe to the channel and like this video. See you in the next video. Thank you so much.